Welcome back, everyone, as we're making our way through the book of Psalms together. This week brings us to Psalm 72. Psalm 72. In keeping with our practice of, as we look at these Psalms, really trying to hone in on what makes a particular Psalm stand out, since, as we noted, they do sometimes tend to have a lot of similarities. Sometimes they can kind of run together just a bit. So what's somewhat unique about it? Psalm 72 actually has, in my estimation, three things that make it somewhat different. And the first of them actually starts with the superscription. Now, if you're looking at the King James Version, as I am, it says a psalm for Solomon. If you're looking at the American Standard Version, it says a psalm of Solomon. Now, as you could make a case either way as you're reading through. Certainly, it seems to fit Solomon. We'll see a number of reasons why that could be. But in particular, the one thing that really maybe possibly gives a clue is the very last verse of the psalm, which reads, "The prayers of David, the son of Jesse, are ended." If that's the case, then it would certainly seem to be David's prayer for Solomon. So a prayer or expressing his wishes and his hopes of a king for a king. So two things to note regarding verse 20 and trying to drive at this question of just who wrote this and who is it about. It's possible that what you have here is actually the words of David toward the end of his life about his son Solomon, who's about to be king. But Solomon is the one who actually had to put pen to paper, as it were, or ink to scroll, because of David's failing health. Right. So it is a psalm of David for Solomon, but Solomon has to actually write it because David is so badly off that he's not able to do so himself. And that would certainly align with what we see in the beginning of 1 Kings, when you had this moment where David had to proclaim Solomon king in order to stop his brother from taking it illegitimately. And David was in such poor health, you recall, it was said that he could not keep heat, and so Abishag is the one who among her many duties caring for David was literally to keep him warm because his health is so poor. So that's one possibility, right? Kind of like how in the New Testament we have letters that are Paul's letters, but they're written by an amanuensis or a secretary, someone else who actually is why in Romans chapter 16 you have this note about Tertius, and you wonder, well, who is this? This is Paul's scribe. So that's one possibility. The other one is the Jewish Publication Society, the Tanakh version. So this is the Jewish Bible, which is just the Old Testament. Indicates that verses 18 through 20 are not actually part of this psalm. Rather, they are concluding remarks for Book 2 of Psalms. Now, you may this goes way back to when we first started covering Psalms. Psalms is actually divided into 5 books, this being done to mirror the Pentateuch. The Pentateuch, the Torah, has 5 books, Genesis through Deuteronomy, so Psalms was divided up into 5 books. This is actually this psalm is the final book in Book 2 of Psalms. Book 2 is Psalms 42 to 72. In fact, depending on the version that you have, mine actually, I have King James Notes, Book 3 begins with Psalm 73. So, if that's the case, and the last couple of books, or the last couple of verses here are not actually concluding remarks for Psalm 72, but rather they're concluding remarks for Book 2 of the Psalms, then, that kind of, that brings its own question into the mix. So a psalm for Solomon, a psalm of Solomon, potentially both. But either way, Either way, I think it's worth noting that as you read through this, there are several indications, because most of this psalm, we'll come to an outline in just a second, most of this psalm is a tentative description of the king's reign. All right, so what is it hoped that the reign of this king is going to be like? And the psalmist goes through to describe it. Of the things listed here, he talks a bit in the beginning about judicial wisdom, and that fits Solomon better than anyone else you can think of in the Old Testament. 1 Kings chapter 3, Solomon famously makes this request for wisdom. He's granted it just in our class recently. We saw this incident where, you have the two women and the baby, and he's renowned for his wisdom. So that's mentioned, and that fits. Also fitting here is this idea that he rules over an extensive kingdom, that he collects tributes and gifts from others all around. This is also fitting of Solomon's reign. It specifically mentions in here Tarshish, that aligns with 1 Kings 10. Whether that's Tarshish as Tarsus in southeastern Turkey, which is the town where Paul comes from centuries later, or Tartessus in southern Spain, that Tarshish, if you think of Jonah. Either way, it aligns with Kings. And also Sheba is mentioned, which is also mentioned in 1 Kings 10. So this idea that he has an extensive territory, foreign kings bring him tribute, bring him gifts, Tarshish and Sheba specifically, all of these things point to Solomon. So, a brief outline. This is somewhat new. The first 17 verses are, again, a description of the king's reign. Verses 18 and 19, you have a doxology, which is a rather formulaic statement of praise, and then verse 20, a concluding subscript. However, if, as I just noted a few moments ago, 18 to 20 apply to Book 2, not to Psalm 72, then that first part, verses 1 through 17, describing the king's reign, becomes the outline of the entire psalm. Within that section, verses 1 to 18, the first 7 verses, again, all describing what this king's reign hopefully will be like. 1 to 7, that it would be a reign of righteousness, or that this is going to be a king who comports himself in a right manner according to God's ways. 8 through 11, a reign that's universal in its scope. 12 to 14, a reign of benevolence, that this will be a king who is generous and compassionate to his people, specifically the poor and needy. And then 15 to 17, a reign that is perpetual, one that is going to last. Okay, so with that in mind, let's read through it. Again, keeping in mind these aspects of the king's reign that the psalmist really hones in on. And then at the end, we'll kind of come back and revisit the big question about the psalm that will probably occur to you too as we're reading through it. Give the king thy judgments, O God, and thy righteousness unto the king's son. Presumably, David and Solomon. He shall judge thy people with righteousness, and thy poor with judgment. The mountains shall bring peace to the people, and the little hills by righteousness. He shall judge the poor of the people. He shall save the children of the needy, and shall break in pieces the oppressor. They shall fear thee as long as the sun and moon endure throughout all generations. He shall come down like rain upon the mown grass, as showers that water the earth. In his days shall the righteous flourish, and the abundance of peace, so long as the moon endureth. Again, righteousness being the key idea for these first 7 verses. He's going to do the right thing. He's going to rule the way that God would have the king of his people rule. 8 to 11, the universal nature of his kingdom. He shall have dominion also from sea to sea, from the river unto the ends of the earth. They that dwell in the wilderness shall bow before him, and his enemies shall lick the dust. A little bit of that imprecatory kind of a thought there we talked about before. The kings of Tarshish and of the isles, so these are isles in the eastern Mediterranean and Aegean, shall bring presents. The kings of Sheba and Seba shall offer gifts. Yea, all kings shall fall down before him, all nations shall serve him. Again, fitting. During the United Kingdom of Israel, specifically David and Solomon's reign, this is really the one time in ancient Israel's history where Israel is kind of the big power at the time. Normally throughout most of ancient Israel's history, they're kind of sandwiched between Egypt to the south and a variety of kingdoms that change over time to the north. The Hittites, the Syrians, the Assyrians, the Babylons. And as we noted before, we say north because even though many of these peoples, the Babylonians are, if you look at a map, are actually to the east of Israel, geographically speaking. Literally what's east of Israel is desert. So when we say Egypt to the south and these others to the north, it's because if you think about a map, you've got the Mediterranean Sea on one side, you've got the desert on the other side, and then this narrow strip of land right along the coast. So you think Lebanon, Israel, and then down into Egypt. All of these other great powers besides Egypt, again, Syrians, Assyrians, Babylonians, whether they're literally to the north or more to the east, so far as Israel is concerned, it's north, because they would come from the north down into Israel. So during this brief time in Israel's history, again, David and Solomon, for a variety of reasons, Israel's power, I guess economically, militarily, politically speaking, is at its highest point. So again, you do have other nations bringing tribute to Israel, which is not typical. Normally, it's the other way around. Again, the divided kingdom we're going to see in the north and the south, these kings who go about, paying tribute and making gifts to other kings, usually in hopes that they won't just come and run over top of everything and enslave them all. But again, it fits Solomon if but for a time. 12 to 14, a reign of benevolence. He shall deliver the needy when he crieth, the poor also, and him that hath no helper. He shall spare the poor and needy, and shall save the souls of the needy. He shall redeem their soul from deceit and violence, and precious shall their blood be in his sight. In 15 to 17, a perpetual reign. He shall live, and him shall be given of the gold of Sheba. Prayer also shall be made for him continually, and daily shall he be praised. There shall be a handful of corn in the earth upon the top of the mountains. The fruit thereof shall shake like Lebanon, and they of the city shall flourish like grass of the earth. His name shall endure forever. His name shall be continued as long as the sun, and men shall be blessed in him. All nations shall call him blessed. Okay, and then 18 to 19, this doxology and subscript, keeping in mind this question of to what is it, should it actually be attached. Blessed be the Lord God, the God of Israel, who only doeth wondrous things. And blessed be his glorious name forever, and let the whole earth be filled with his glory. Amen and amen. The prayers of David, the son of Jesse, are ended. Okay. The big question about this psalm is this, and this is the third thing. I noted at the beginning, three things really stand out about Psalm 72. The first one being its subject. You've got David and Solomon and that whole question. That makes it somewhat unique. The second thing being that it's the final psalm in book 2 of the Psalms, which again gets to this question about the last few verses. And then the third thing that makes it somewhat unique is this big question. Who is this psalm about? Authorship questions aside, is it about Solomon, or is this a messianic psalm about Jesus? And you can pick elements in it that could be argued either way. Like I said, there's a lot of specific things in it that speak to Solomon, certainly not the least of which is verse 1 and verse 20. But then, you also have these things like verse 17, this idea of the everlasting kingdom. Is it possible that it's both? That in the immediate context, it's about Solomon, but then there are also these elements in here that hint at something far greater, a far greater king, a far greater kingdom. Certainly wouldn't be the first time we've seen that. In fact, just recently, Psalm 69, we just noted just a couple of weeks ago, Psalm 69, verse 9, just for one example among many, many, many. But when you're reading the psalm itself, it's clear. It's talking about David or about Solomon or about David's friends or enemies. But then in the New Testament, you may have either the psalm itself or a particular verse, or sometimes even just a particular phrase within a verse that's taken and then given messianic import later. And people argue, it shouldn't come as a surprise, people argue all three ways on this. There are some that will say, well, this is only about Solomon. Others will say, no, this is completely messianic in its import. And others who will say, well, it's a bit of both. In my estimation, clearly about Solomon for some of the reasons we've noted. But again, there are these elements here that do seem to speak to something far greater. Now, the counterpoint to that would be that it's hyperbolic language intentionally, because he doesn't meant to talk about a literal eternal kingdom. Rather, this is a father who's a king who's about to die, looking at the upcoming reign of his son who's going to reign in his stead, and using very, very hyperbolic, regal language. I hope he has the best reign, who's benevolent. How does it compare with reality? Well, righteousness, certainly we have Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, other great writings from Solomon. And certainly if you compare him to kings of the northern and southern kingdoms that follow, he's hardly the worst that Israel ever has. But I can't help but think of, one of the defining hallmarks of Solomon's life. And we haven't come to it just yet in our Sunday morning class, but we're rapidly getting there. And we've seen hints of it already. This idea that Solomon's heart gets turned away from God by the foreign wives that he takes, the foreign influences that creep into his court. We've already seen that he's taken the daughter of Pharaoh as a wife, and this is going to be a recurring problem for him. So righteousness as a king, to a great extent, yes, certainly more so than some that follow him. But he is certainly not without his problems. Universal, a united kingdom, even though it split shortly after his death. And as I just was saying a moment ago, it is at the height of its power during his reign. So the question becomes, does he literally mean the whole world, or is he, again, speaking somewhat hyperbolically? Benevolence. Right, benevolence. So Solomon's son Rehoboam is going to be rejected by the people, by at least the 10 tribes that are going to split off and follow after Jeroboam and form the northern kingdom. Rehoboam gets rejected when the people call upon him to abandon the crushing taxes of his father, Solomon. So perhaps not quite so benevolent as perhaps David is expressing here that he hopes he would be. Now Rehoboam, at the bad advice of younger men who were giving him counsel, they tell him, what, Solomon, you need to show people, or Rehoboam, you need to show people who's boss. You need to lay down the law, and he ends up going and raising taxes even higher than Solomon had, and so the people follow after Jeroboam instead. But a benevolent king, given what we know about Solomon, take, for example, the case of the two women with the baby from chapter 3. Take what he has to say in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, certainly. But again, when you see how things unfold with Rehoboam, perhaps he could have been a bit more so. And perpetual, right? Just like David before him, Solomon died. This kingdom that endures forever, is it hyperbolic language, or is it hinting at something, this eternal kingdom from David's bloodline, ultimately by way of Christ? That's the big question about this psalm. Hyperbolic language or messianic import. Personally, I'm inclined to think that like other Psalms that we've seen, there's both here. Immediately, it seems pretty clear to me it's about Solomon. But you do have these shades of hints that with David's bloodline and with this kingdom, there's something much, much bigger that's ultimately going to unfold. That I would say David, Solomon, and others of their time, even for centuries to follow, don't fully comprehend. Okay, that is Psalm 72. Lord willing, next time we meet, we will pick back up with the next one, Psalm 73. And even though there's nothing really to indicate to you that it's happening, we're going to shift from book 2 of Psalms into book 3 of Psalms. So thank you for your attention today, and I look forward to the next time. Thank you.